So let me tell you what happened today before we dive into the history. So I have effectively quit sugar for the last couple months, and I let myself have fruit now, which I didn't before. But anyway, today I was at my son's house, and he was fixing himself, and he was making beef sliders, ground beef sliders, and I was really hungry, and so he put melted cheese on this, enriched dinner roll crap things that are loaded with sugar, and then melted cheese, and then the beef, and it was really really delicious. And I was like, okay. Well, about an hour after that, I just had this huge energy crash, and I was like driving by Starbucks, and I was like, "Ah, that's what I need, some caffeine." And I went, oh my God, this was the exact cycle that I was in for years and years and years, and it's what America is doing. And so I just finished my soy latte, which I'm sure is loaded with sugar, even though there's no syrup in it. And I can feel that background tiredness that I have been free of for so long. So anyway, yes, I wanted to do this series on sugar because I've inspired a number of people to just totally quit it. And since menopause, I just gained that 5 and then 10 and then 15, even close to 20 extra pounds. And that old belief out there that, oh, you can't get rid of it. It's menopause. Wait, this is just what happens. Your fat is just storing estrogen, and, just give it up. And everything I tried wasn't working. And, my body just wasn't as effective at cleaning the shit out as it used to be. And then I noticed memory issues, and my guides told me, you don't have dementia yet, but you are, which is called type 3 or type 4 diabetes. It has to do with insulin resistance. And that motivated me to turn it around because my mom died of dementia. And it forced, that's of my 2 top fears in life. The universe decided I was going to deal with them this year in the last couple of months. And I'm actually going to go over here because that light is bothering me and I'm hot. So anyway, I did go on a keto diet and I quit sugar. And it really wasn't as hard as you would think it is. I mean, you kind of go through this hunger thing, but then once your body burns off all the glucose, then it burns ketones, and your heart and your brain prefer ketones. And I had so many little symptoms go away. Like here's an example. So I would be at Starbucks and I would reach out for my cup, and as I would bring it close to me, my hand would shake more and more. I don't have that symptom in any other circumstance, but I'm like, what is that? Well, after I had been sugar-free for about a month, maybe it wasn't even a month, I was having a breve because there's no sugar in that. It's just fat, half and half, and coffee. And I was like, oh, good, I can still go to Starbucks. And I reached out and I took my coffee cup, and there was no shaking at all. And I was like, sugar? Really? Okay, now we're going to dive into the brief history, and I'm going to, as I have said before, deliver this like a newscaster because there's some really, really horrific information in here. And, sugar went all over the world around the 1500s en masse and got the whole world addicted to it. And the abuses of it, the slave trade, like all over the world, which isn't just slaves from Africa, although that is the number one reason that the whole slave trade happened the way it did. It wasn't cotton and it wasn't tobacco. It was sugar, because people are getting addicted to it. So anyway, I focused in on just America, and then particularly Louisiana. And so here's the brief history. The Sanskrit word sakara means grit or gravel. Sugar as granules boiled down from sugarcane syrup. So the word is Sanskrit, and it's very similar to sucrose and sugar, and it is where we get the word. And they're the oldest, other than the Aborigines, they're the oldest culture on the earth. So the truth is it's been around for a really long time, and then we were free of it for a couple hundred years. Isn't that nice? It's been researched, it's been found 10,000 BC in Papua New Guinea, 4000 BC in Southeast Asia. It became chemically refined in 500 BC, like a honey powder. It slowly spread. Okay, now we're skipping not only forward to the time of Christ, but 1200 years after. It spread slowly to medieval Europe, but the elite only had it. And note in the paintings, the smiles of the royals and the elites, they're not showing their teeth. And in a couple where you do see their teeth, they're brown, they're rotten. And Queen Elizabeth had black teeth, and she was addicted to marzipan. And there was a trend of blackening in your teeth to imitate the royals. Isn't that just sick? They would have statues built out of sugar to demonstrate their wealth because it was very, very expensive. The first commercial crops showed up in Madeira between Africa and Portugal in the late 1400s. And then from Portugal, they crossed the Atlantic, in the whole Columbus era, and they went to Brazil. They took their sugar industry to Brazil because the temperature and the climate was just right for sugarcane. There were mills and plantations that just exploded in the 14 and 1500s, and it created a demand for industrial metals, and it drove the Industrial Revolution in large part, and slavery. Slavery began en masse in Portugal in taking them from Africa and taking them transatlantic to the Americas. And that's why I said the history as it pertains to America, because I try to say United States because it's all the Americas, but this is, it was primarily the West Indies. Now, this is an incredibly shocking statistic, but there were an estimated 12 million Africans stolen and put into the slave trade between the 1500s to the mid 1800s. Of that 12 million, 2 million died en route. So there were about 10 million that came transatlantic. How many of those would you guess of the 10 million came to America? Not even 500,000. 388,000 came to the US. And that's one reason that slavery remained in this country for so long, because in the other countries where they went, there were eventually uprisings, and they overthrew their captors. And I didn't research that history, but think Dominican Republic, Haiti, places like that. But anyway, and the conditions were just absolutely horrific everywhere. But let's focus in on America now. Okay, so Louisiana took over the sugar industry because of the climate. The climate was perfect. Did you notice the little light things flying around? I think they might be orbs, unless there's some kind of reflection going on. I don't know. That was wild. And I just want to insert at one point, it's really important that I remember this, that this population of slaves of the story I'm about to tell you, which is really horrific, came through to me, and they said, we're done with this. We're free of it. You don't have to carry the burden of this. You don't have to feel guilty or feel bad. You don't have to try to give your energy to this, because we are okay. They've transcended the whole thing. And they came in purposefully. Many of us have memories of being a slave. And we came in and we had those lifetimes on purpose for our soul development. So I just want to make that really clear. This isn't this is a victim population type of thing. I just want to show you the link between cruelty and sugar, drugs, addictive substances, and the abuse and trafficking of human beings. Interesting theme, right? Okay, so Louisiana. Jean-Etienne Devore learned how to crystallize sugar in 1795, and then the slave labor was brought in. It's like, why couldn't they just build a business and pay people? No, we have to make as much money as we possibly can, so it's going to be slave labor. Hi, Jeannie. And the general theme is that a slave was not an animal, unless you consider an animal like a tool. They were more like machine parts, and it was cheaper to replace them than to maintain them. So by 1860, there were over 300,000 slaves. Yes, 20,000, I think, were brought into Louisiana in 1795, and by 1860, there were over 300,000. So yes, they would keep shipping them in, and 1860 is when they made it illegal to bring them over from Africa, but slavery wasn't outlawed yet. Okay, almost all of America's sugar, almost all of it, was in Louisiana. Okay, so the sugar parish, it's called a parish, Parish, parish like a township, very hierarchical. And the conditions, okay, the planting happened between January and February, January, mind you, and then the harvest was October to December. So this whole time it was feeding, maintaining the crops. And then they would harvest October to December, and January start all over again. It's like they didn't catch a break. This is a quote from The Sugar Masters, Planters and Slaves in Louisiana's Cane World, 1820 to 1860 by Richard Follett. Above all, they sought to master sugar and men and compel all to bow to them in total submission. As machinery was introduced, it worsened rather than lessened the burden. The machinery made things go faster, so they whipped the slaves harder and said, "You must keep up." And they were punished or killed if they didn't. Men were moved to machine operating, and the women were moved to the fields and became breeding machines. There was an extremely high miscarriage rate. They were forced to stop breastfeeding and return to work. They had a life expectancy of seven years. Baton Rouge was 75% slave population. Only 25% of the residents of Baton Rouge were not slaves. The death rate exceeded the birth rate. More were shipped in from the South. 1803, Congress said there was no more international slavery shipped in. Slaves, so they didn't come from Africa after 1803. They outlawed the transatlantic slave trade. So then they just kept bringing them in. In fact, the story 12 Years a Slave is about someone being taken to Louisiana and put in that industry. There were 22,000 slave holders, and each separate parish, held maybe 5, 10, 20, or hundreds of slaves. They were the wealthiest barons in the US. Global trade eventually was going to compete with beet sugar, which was only a little less brutal. And this is where Europeans, Russians, Slavic people, and I think some Asians were all brought to the West because conditions were good for beet sugar in those locations. And it was still really bad, but it wasn't as horrific. So going back to Louisiana, October to December, they worked 24 hours a day, similar to a very large sugar corporation I shall not name, but it's analogous to that little game we play that has little blocks and dots on them, and you line them all up and they all fall over. Interesting parallel there. But that, so I was having a conversation with Kathy, my friend that lives upstairs, about this, and she was like, I was in Florida and I looked across the swamp, or what they had destroyed in order to turn it into a factory. And she's like, I just looked at that place and it was evil. I could just feel evil. She's not psychic. She knew nothing about the sugar industry or its history. And she's like, evil was just coming off of that place because of the legacy, because of the energy that's never been cleared. And this is in all of those tiny little sugar packets. It's in those bags of sugar. It's in all the friendly, the whole sugar thing, and it's like raw cane sugar in a brown package. Marketing. It's just marketing. It's the same damn shit. And the cane sugar is absolutely the worst because of the energy of it. Okay, so cut they would cut it with machetes, grind it in a mill, boil down to crystals. They were packed in barrels and shipped. And all of these things that happen to sugar happen to people. Machetes, ground in a mill, boiled. Not going into detail, use your imagination or don't. A man, a slave, was stationed full time next to this enormous mill grinder where slaves would walk up and throw it in there, men, women, and children, and throw the cane in there, grind it up, boil it down. It was just this enormous opening, and he was stationed at the mill grinder with a sword to free anyone who got caught in the machinery. Farming equipment purchased at the time in Louisiana as compared to Wisconsin, $19 million worth of farming equipment versus $6 million in Wisconsin. 19 versus 6. 635 million by 2023 economic parallel. There were 500 elite barons. So remember I said there were like 20,000, no. How many parishes were there? Sorry, where is it? It's on this page. Oh, so there were 22,000 slaveholders, but only 500 of them had a large number of slaves and were the elite of the elite barons. There was a place called the Sugar Palace, and it's worth researching. It's difficult to find. This information is repressed. That's what I found. It was difficult to find this information, and the best sources were people that had to write independent research papers on all of it and go back and look in physical documentation. In the sugar industry today, I will explore prejudice against the black sugar farmers. So there was this ongoing case where they would just treat the black farmers differently, and everybody's like, oh, yay, black farmers, they get to, do it themselves and everything. And there's still really, really bad racist practices that put them last in line, give them extra hoops to jump through to get loans and stuff like that. And it's just the legacy because it's never been cleared. And that's something that I just want to keep reiterating is that when you consume sugar, you're connecting to this legacy. Okay, so sugar farmers upon whose ancestors' backs loan applications take 3 times longer. Okay, John Burnside the first had 753 enslaved at Ascension Plantation and 187 at St. James Place, or St. James Parish. So he had almost 1,000 slaves employed, not employed, but, working. His 1860 estate was worth $2 million at the time, would be $79 million today. Groups were formed for farming tasks called gangs. That's where the word comes from. Gangs. They operated with military precision. The rewards that were used to incentivize them were extra clothing, a little bit of extra money, extra food, because they didn't have enough food, liquor. Ooh, that's a good one. What states did you mention? I'm looking at the cards of the states. Louisiana. Today, it includes Florida and Texas. The punishments were whippings, beatings, burnings, rape, mutilations, humiliations, dungeons, stocks, shackles. You know what stocks are? Where you have to bend over, and your head and your arms are through these big wooden things that clamp down, and so you're in a stress position. It's a form of torture. Shackles, iron neck collars, and family separation. And when you think about what were their resources, what allowed them to wake up every day, their families, the number one reason to do anything was to keep their family safe, their loved ones, and they used that against them by threatening to separate them, and they did. Louisiana is a four of clubs. Wow, that's interesting. Very set in their thinking, for sure. Karma to the five of clubs, which is awakening. Um, okay, so there was a baron named Bennett Barrow who, for 23 months, wrote in a diary sights without conscience, I might add, hand sawing, dunking, stake, shoot, rake heads, men made to wear women's clothing. 160 whippings was a whipping frolic, half of them whipped today. So, quote, whipping frolic, half of them whipped today. He wrote that in his journal. Poorly fed, expected to hunt and garden to supplement their diet. With all their extra time and energy, runaways found the safety in the swamps. They actually did, because who's going to go there? They can't get their dogs to run through all that bog. They can't be tracked with all that moisture. Okay, so that's Louisiana. Let's shift over now to Texas, because once slavery was outlawed, the articles I was reading just seemed to be the post-slavery. For some reason, Texas came up. So in 2018, I found this article. In 2018, 95 bodies found convict leasing. Okay, they were found. They were victims of convict leasing. So Black people would be arrested on false charges, sent to prison, and became a fresh supply of slave labor. Sugar killed more people than any form of agriculture. Let that sink in. So it was cheaper to just call up the prison guy and say, okay, we worked 5 of them to death today. We need a bunch more. Send them over for free. And this is after slavery was abolished. So they found a way around it. Isn't that just sick? And remember, they came to me en masse as a population and said, we have released all of this karma. We have transcended. We have ascended. We're okay. It's interesting. It was called Ascension Plantation, that one with over 700 slaves. I mean, it's just interesting. Were those some really bad people that we could name today out in the world doing really, really bad shit that had to go back to that time to pay off some karma so that they could ascend? I don't know. Just saying. Okay. We've all done it all, like that Sting song. Yeah, the song's going through my head now. Yeah, I can't remember. Anyway, so 70% of all slaves went to sugar production. Think about that. 70% of all African abductees. We just think of them as slaves. No, they had lives. They were people. They were abducted. And 70% of those that were abducted from Africa and shipped over went to sugar plantations. And we see these pictures. It's all propaganda, as though it was a happy and sweet and nostalgic thing to pick cotton. You know, that home something, that movie with Sally Field and Danny Glover, and all about the cotton. Except for 12 Years a Slave, you don't see the movies about the sugar, because it is so freaking brutal that I have to be careful in my speech and simply talking about it. So, okay, they had to work in the full sun, eat while working. They would pass out, get dragged into the shade, doused, sent back. 7-year life expectancy. This is in Texas after slavery. Replacing a dead prisoner cost less than to feed and care for one. They literally were worked to death, used up. There were mosquito epidemics. Of the 95 dead, forensics revealed shackle poison amputees, relatively young edema, heart failure, sunstroke, extreme dehydration, bone infection, muscles torn from bones. I had to grieve for a whole day after this deep dive because there's only one thing that I've heard of that is more horrific than this. Okay, the whole Holocaust was really bad, but the child trafficking and ADREN harvesting, torture, so that someone can get high and look younger. That is the number one most horrific, and bred in total darkness for that purpose. That is so demonic we cannot even wrap our heads around it. Okay, then there's this. And then I would put the Holocaust third. Of course, I wasn't there. I mean, I was there. I have memories. Okay, but this to me, there's a brutality about it for the purpose of greed that makes me just yuck. It's just so yuck. And when you just think about how sugar is in everything, we are addicted on purpose. Conditions globally are similar. Industrialization did not improve the conditions. Louisiana was the most brutal. And the very last thing I did is I just typed in cocaine and human trafficking, asking the AI to compare it to the sugar industry. And the parallels were like, they were all parallel. Except for a couple of things. But they're very similar. And when you think about the energy of human trafficking, and this, we don't think of slavery as human trafficking, and we don't think of human trafficking as slavery. But to be used as a resource to stuff someone's pocket out of greed, and okay, that's done. Thank God I did it. I finally did it. Woo! It's 2:22. I'm done. I did the brief history of sugar. So I just want to say, if that isn't reason enough to completely divest yourself of refined sugar, I don't know what is. But I do know, because in my future videos, I'm going to be talking about sugar and the body. So I just think it's so interesting that today I just had some sliders, a couple of sandwiches with the bread that has the refined sugar in it, and then I had a like energy dropped. And I was like, oh, I need coffee. So my favorite Starbucks, which has sugar in it, the soy latte, even if there's no syrup. And I was like, that's how I was for years and years and years, and just couldn't lose that extra 15 pounds. You guys, when I stopped consuming sugar and carbs and I went on a keto diet, which I'll define for you in a minute, I lost 10 pounds in 1 week, and I lost 5 more in another week. And I'm still detoxing. My brain is clearer, much clearer. My skin improved immediately. That shaking went away, much less achy. Tiredness, I needed less sleep. Just more engaged with life. So anyway, so the keto diet, it's mostly fat. So there's this in the middle is mostly fat. So like avocados, animal fat, any kind of fat, dairy fat is my favorite. And then protein, and then almost no carbs, the lowest carb possible. And what I found is if I went totally keto for like 3 or 4 days at a time, which I did in the beginning. Actually, it was more like a week at a time. I realized, I think it was about 2 weeks, I realized that I just wasn't feeling right. And I was like, God, what would make me feel right? I was like, bread, bread. I need, and my husband makes really, really delicious sourdough bread. And so I had a couple of pieces and I was like, that's exactly what I needed. So organic with no glyphosate is, it's not the gluten, it's the glyphosate. So anyway, as long as I, as long as I do that, okay, so I've pretty much gone, I don't want to say gone back to a normal diet because I still don't consume sugar at all, except very occasionally. I'm allowing more desserts in, like if there's a celebration or something, but I don't want it. Energetically, I'm just like, you know, it's vibration. I am much more sensitive psychically, vibrationally. I have been finding myself able to assess a person's health problems through the sound of their voice. And I know that this is one of the results of just getting cleaner. Okay, Jeannie, wow, amazing. That's what the spade reminds us about, taking care of the physical body in order to be healthy and work our ass if I'm the things our souls came here to do. Yeah, yeah, taking care of the body in order to do what we came here to do, to be the humans that we have the capacity to be, living into our potential and cleaning the vessel, I think is, I apologize if I have a little self-righteous tone in my voice or if there's any judgment or condemnation, the little persnickety. That's my seven of diamonds talking. We kind of have self-righteous things sometimes, but I guess, my judgment is, and I'm not a victim of it because now I'm aware of it. I took the ride and I'm not taking the ride anymore. So I'm not a victim. But when you think of the sugar agenda, okay, so Edge of Wonder, you go to rise.tv and you can subscribe. And I think there's also some free content you can look at. But the Edge of Wonder guys did this research into sugar, and they found that Pepsi and cola were owned by the same ones. There was this big deal between the Soviet Union and the United States, this big, huge campaign to push sugar, giant colas. There was just this onslaught against the human body all over the planet, but in America particularly. And, we used to consume, okay, let's see if I can remember this. We used to consume, before this whole sugar craze in the 1500s, 1 kilo of sugar a year. Now the average American consumes 1 kilo per week. I meant work our ass off in the things we came here to expand upon. Sorry for the typos. No, I usually get it. I knew you would write in the correction, but um, perfect timing. I guess the universe is telling me that I am done with this presentation. Yes. Okay. I will be back with more. The impact, sugar's impact on the body and the nutritional reasons to quit. Okay. Have a good one. Thanks for watching.